Pawn Stars never felt scripted to millions of viewers. It felt lived in. The creak of the shop floor, the hum of Las Vegas heat, the familiar rhythm of deals made and deals lost. But behind that comfort was a weight few fans ever saw. The cameras captured sharp jokes and tough negotiations, yet they could never fully show the exhaustion, the illness, the regrets, and the private moments when the lights were off, and the silence was louder than any cash register. Some of the faces we loved carried burdens that followed them home, burdens they rarely spoke about, even to those closest to them. Richard Harrison, known to the world simply as the Old Man, was more than a punchline or a tough-love boss. Off camera, his health was failing in ways that frightened his family. The man who once stood tall behind the counter began to slow down, his voice growing softer, his patience thinner, not from anger, but from pain. Close friends later admitted he hated showing weakness. He believed respect came from strength, and illness felt like betrayal to everything he had built. In quiet moments, he worried not about money or fame, but about whether his family would remember the lessons, not the arguments. There were words left unsaid between fathers and sons, conversations postponed because there was always another episode to film, another business decision to make, another day promised that never came. People close to the family have whispered that the last years were filled with complicated emotions, love mixed with distance, pride mixed with regret. Fame had made everything bigger, including the misunderstandings. When the cameras stopped rolling, the silence forced everyone to face truths they had avoided for years. The Old Man admired old Hollywood legends like John Wayne, men he believed stood for discipline and legacy. Yet, even legends fade quietly. His passing didn't happen in front of the cameras, it happened in a hospital room where time felt cruelly short. Those who were there remember how his final words were less about business and more about family, about hoping the shop would stay a place of honesty, not just profit. His absence left a hollow space in the store, a chair that suddenly felt too empty, a voice that could no longer interrupt with a sarcastic remark. Fans felt the loss deeply, but the family felt something heavier. Grief mixed with guilt. Did they listen enough? Did they say thank you enough? Did they understand him while he was still there? The show continued, but something invisible had changed. The laughter felt quieter, the pauses longer. Viewers noticed it, even if they couldn't explain why. The heart of the shop had lost one of its strongest beats. And Richard Harrison was not the only presence fans mourn in their own quiet way. Over the years, familiar faces came and went, some due to illness, some due to personal battles never fully explained. The world of Pawn Stars was connected to a wider Hollywood ecosystem, friendships with collectors, historians, and entertainers who themselves faced tragic endings. Names like Burt Reynolds, who once crossed paths in Las Vegas circles, reminded everyone how quickly icons vanish, leaving behind stories and unanswered questions. What makes these losses so painful is not just death, but the feeling that we knew them, even though we only saw fragments. We laughed with them, argued with them, trusted them. When they disappeared, it felt personal, like losing a distant uncle, a mentor you never met, a voice that somehow guided you through ordinary nights. Ordinary nights. As the shop doors closed each evening, the echoes of the past lingered, carrying secrets, regrets, and memories too heavy for television. And in those echoes, lies the beginning of a story that is far more emotional than any deal ever made across that counter. The loss didn't end with a single name, and that truth slowly began to haunt the walls of the shop. After the old man was gone, those who remained felt an unspoken pressure to keep smiling, to keep the machine moving, even as something fragile inside them cracked. People close to the show later admitted that grief was never properly processed. It was postponed, buried under production schedules and public expectations. America wanted comfort, familiarity, jokes at the counter. What they didn't see were the sleepless nights, the sudden silences, the moments when memories hit without warning and left grown men staring at the floor. Rick carried the weight differently than viewers realized. He had spent his life trying to earn approval from a father who believed praise made people weak. When that chance was gone, it left a wound that no amount of success could close. Friends say Rick would sometimes replay old arguments in his head, wondering which words he should have swallowed, which ones he should have said sooner. There were moments when fame felt like a cruel joke, because the man he wanted to impress the most was no longer there to see it. In private, Rick struggled with anxiety, a quiet fear that the legacy could collapse under his watch. Chumley, often dismissed as comic relief, felt the losses in a more vulnerable way. Few fans know how deeply he bonded with the older figures around him. They weren't just co-workers, they were anchors. When illness and death began touching the circle, it shook him. He has spoken quietly to friends about moments of depression, about feeling lost once the loud Easter stopped being enough. Behind the jokes was a man trying to cope with sudden emptiness, terrified of disappointing people who once believed in him when no one else did. Even secondary figures, the recurring experts and familiar dealers, carried their own shadows. Some battled serious illnesses away from the spotlight. Others faced personal tragedies that never made headlines. One longtime memorabilia expert, beloved by fans for his calm voice and encyclopedic knowledge, privately fought cancer while still appearing cheerful on camera. Those close to him recall how he would step outside between takes, catching his breath, steadying himself before returning with a smile. When he eventually passed, many viewers didn't even realize they had already been watching his goodbye. The pain was compounded by the strange relationship between television and reality. The show immortalized moments, freezing people in time, while real life moved forward relentlessly. Fans would rewatch old episodes and see familiar faces laughing, unaware that some of those smiles belonged to people already gone. Families of the departed spoke about how surreal it felt to see their loved ones alive on screen while mourning them in real life. It was comfort and torture at the same time. There were whispers of regret within the production itself. Crew members later admitted they sometimes pushed too hard, filming through exhaustion, through illness, because the show had become bigger than any individual. Looking back, some wondered if certain moments should have been left private, if certain people should have been protected instead of preserved for entertainment. These thoughts often surfaced too late, after funerals, after condolences, after the realization that time is not something you can negotiate. No matter how skilled you are at making deals, you are at making deals. The world of Pawn Stars had brushed shoulders with Hollywood royalty over the years, from collectors connected to Elvis Presley's legacy to historians who had advised major studios. Those connections reminded everyone that fame does not shield anyone from decline. Just like legends such as Robin Williams or Carrie Fisher, whose public personas masked deep personal struggles, the figures fans loved from the pawn shop carried stories far heavier than their screen time suggested. As the years passed, the shop remained open, the sign still glowing, but the atmosphere subtly shifted. Laughter felt cautious, conversations shorter. The ghosts of those fans still miss seemed to watch quietly from the corners. Reminders that every familiar face is temporary, every moment borrowed. And beneath the surface, there were still stories untold, confessions never shared, truths that would only come out when the world stopped watching. Time has a way of revealing what fame tries to hide. And as the seasons passed, the absence of those fans still miss began to feel heavier than their presence ever was. People who worked behind the scenes described moments when the shop felt strangely quiet. Even during filming, a chair left empty, a joke no one finished, a habit no one realized belonged to someone who would never walk through the door again. Grief didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, unexpected and cruel, often triggered by the smallest details. One former regular, known for bringing in rare artifacts and stories from another era, had slowly faded from the show due to a degenerative illness. He never announced it publicly. He believed mystery was better than pity. Friends recall how he avoided mirrors near the end, how his hands shook while holding items that once felt weightless. His last appearance was filmed on a day he could barely stand, yet he insisted on finishing the segment. When asked why, he reportedly said he didn't want his final memory to be weakness. He passed away months later, and only then did fans begin to understand why his smile had looked so forced. The families of those lost often carried a quiet resentment toward the spotlight. Some felt their loved ones were remembered only as characters, not as human beings who laughed, cried, and feared dying alone. One widow shared privately that the hardest part wasn't the death, but watching strangers debate her husband's worth online, reducing decades of life to a few memorable episodes. She kept his last voicemail saved, a simple message about groceries and coming home early, never knowing it would become a farewell. Rick struggled more than he ever admitted publicly. In moments of honesty with close friends, he confessed that the shop had become a place of echoes. He would catch himself turning to comment on a deal, expecting a familiar voice to argue back, only to remember it was gone. Those moments broke him in ways cameras could never capture. He admired figures like Clint Eastwood, men who carried loss quietly, but even that kind of strength has limits. There were days when Rick questioned whether continuing the show was honoring the past or running from it. The audience sensed the shift. Viewers wrote letters, messages filled with gratitude and grief, sharing how Pawn Stars had helped them through their own losses. Veterans wrote about watching with their fathers who had since passed. Sons talked about bonding moments that could never be recreated. The show had become a backdrop to real lives, and as its figures faded, it mirrored the pain of its audience. That shared sorrow created a strange, invisible bond between strangers.